During our undergraduate trip to Egypt, I thought living with Joshua would be a nightmare because he was noisy, arrogant, and everything I made an effort to avoid. But one night while I was sleeping, he touched me in a way I never would have imagined. I didn't stop him, but what transpired next altered my perception of both him and myself when the college. When I announced my foreign trip to Egypt, the majority of people applauded, and I winced. The rooming assignments were what killed me, not the trip I'd always wanted to take to see the Nile, the pyramids, or the temple. I was excited because, in some way, I knew that Joshua and I would become glued together, and I was obviously correct. Owens's athletic smooth-talking and constant attention-grabbing behavior were the type of person who could get away with anything since his smile enabled others to forget their initial anger. Girls loved him, guys, and he was black, handsome, and built like someone who lived there rather than simply going to the gym occasionally. I avoided him because I was quiet and kept my distance from him, even though his teachers complimented him. Joshua was in disarray, but I remained composed. I was the type of student who received acclaim for essays rather than gifts. Naturally, our lecturer placed us with opposites to promote progress, as she said while holding her clipboard. Chest, like a sacred scroll. And I wanted to question her about if she had ever been by herself for more than 5 minutes. Joshua Owens. But I didn't. Instead, I merely nodded and acted as though nothing was wrong. Cairo's hostel room was tiny, with 2 twin beds, a single wooden desk, and a small. The call to prayer reverberated quietly through the streets from a window that opened out to a surprisingly beautiful view of the skyline. It should have been quiet at dusk when the air smelled of sand and spices. Ought to have been something I quietly marveled at. But all I could think of was how I would make it through. After a week of sharing a room with him, Joshua immediately threw himself onto his bed as if he owned it. "So," he said. "Are we doing the whole silent treatment for a week thing?" she asked, watching me with that omnipresent smirk. "Or will we attempt to be polite?" I didn't answer right away, so I preoccupied myself with unpacking and pretended that it wasn't distracting how he folded his arms behind his head and flexed his biceps in a stretched-out shirt. Was the type of gorgeous person who annoyed me not only because it came naturally to him, but also because he was aware of it. "Let's finally," I muttered, "just get through this without killing each other." He smirked and replied, "Deal," putting my folded t-shirts in the small dresser tray. Expanding. I'm happy to report that I rolled my eyes, but it's disputed our first several days were filled with ancient treasures, heat and sand. We trekked the dunes and visited the pyramids of Giza and went on guided excursions through the busy streets of Cairo. I made an effort to stay away, but Joshua was all over the place, joking around and enticing locals while sharing tidbits of information about Egypt, as he had been annoyingly practicing for a documentary. But he wasn't dumb. At times, he was even perceptive. He would pose questions to the guides that made sense, and about which I had never really considered how people gravitated toward him, and to my dismay, I began to comprehend why. But I remained vigilant. He wasn't a nasty roommate. In fact, he was quite tidy. I didn't trusted individuals, but they didn't snore, and even brought back snacks from convenience stores without me asking. Joshua, for example, ignored people like me unless there was a joke or wager involved, but he continued to observe me, not overtly, but sufficiently that I became aware that occasionally I caught him silently observing me out of the corner of my eye, as if he were attempting to understand me, and it made my skin crawl. Warm kept me up later than I should have, and by the 3rd night, I was worn out. I hadn't slept well since the travel, both mentally and physically, and whatever energy I had left had been depleted by the lengthy journey around the ruins that afternoon. After taking a fast, cold shower, Joshua was still up on his phone, scrolling through his headphones as he fell into bed in a loose tee and boxers facing the wall. I kept my back to his eyes, but his quiet giggle would periodically shatter the silence. Eyes and waited for sleep to come gradually, which it did, but at some point in the middle. The room was dark when I woke up in the middle of the night, and initially, I wasn't even certain I was. When I woke up, the air felt heavier in some way, as if the temperature had increased. I was asleep when I sensed Joshua, not just his presence. I heard a murmur of his voice too, but I hadn't opened my eyes yet. Enough to hear the words, and then so softly that I believed it could have been my breath caught when I imagined his touch grazing my arm, and I was dreaming when I froze, and the contact remained warmly and purposefully. Remained silent, and simply left his fingers there for an additional second. I remained motionless as they were taken away, my pulse pounding and my mind racing. Was he trying to test me, or did he assume I was asleep because I didn't move? I couldn't, in part because I was afraid of the consequences, and in part because I secretly hoped he wouldn't stop. I finally heard I remained awake while Fabric's body slowly shifted back to his bed, and the springs squeaked softly as he nestled there. Long after that, I woke up the following morning with wide eyes and shallow breathing. He looked at Joshua as he searched through his suitcase and hummed a song to himself as if nothing had happened. When he saw me sit up today, he commented, "It's a big day," with that same smirk. "Yes," I answered, my voice coming out of the horse. "And the king's hope you brought nice shoes." Returned to his belongings, which were still buzzing, and suddenly it felt like darkness had never occurred before. But I knew better because that touch wasn't nothing. But I couldn't stop thinking about it the entire time, even though I didn't realize it was only the beginning. Our professor distributed printed itineraries to the group as they boarded the bus in the morning. My thoughts kept returning to the scene where Joshua held the gentle hours later. I still felt the tingling sensation of a whisper that I couldn't make out. I hadn't imagined it. Was certain now that he had lightly touched me as if to ask a question he wasn't sure of. How to ask aloud, but why was he behaving so normally? He joked and laughed. One of the females said she was starving, so the guys in the rear of the bus threw her a protein bar. He was, with his muscles flaunted like he didn't give a damn. He wore sunglasses and a tank top. I watched him leave the room last night, as if he hadn't gotten out of bed and gone across the room to touch me while I was asleep. He caught me glancing once, just once, out of the corner of my eye as I slid deeper into my seat. And his lips moved, as if he wanted to utter something for the smallest moment. However, he didn't. Instead, he simply returned to the discussion as if I wasn't unraveling 5. The journey to Luxor was lengthy, hot, rough, and noisy from a distance. The most of the group slept against the windows or engaged in hushed conversation, but I was unable to calm down. I kept replaying it in my mind, paying attention to every small detail and change. Was it merely curiosity, an error, or anything else at one time with the sheets? Joshua lowered his sunglasses and leaned toward me. "You're really quiet today," he said. Murmured in a voice so quiet that only I could hear it, and I tried to keep my eyes on him. He tilted his head slightly and watched me for a moment. His look neutral, just exhausted. Longer than necessary, after which he reclined back and remained silent for the remainder of the ride. The day flew by. Towering tombs carved into the colors of rock surrounded the Valley of the King's stone passages and ancient wonders. I should have been amazed that it hadn't faded after thousands of years, but my Joshua's attention was broken, but he remained close enough, not overtly, that I could sense him around me. He made notes in the corners of our tour notes, and asked insightful questions. Guidebook and casually brushed his shoulder into mine every now and then. However, I took note of the small details, like the fact that he didn't laugh as much as normal, and that his gaze lingered longer than they should have while I wasn't around, and his hand touched mine when we passed water bottles. Was he trying to test me by staring at me? Or was he afraid I would bring it up? And honestly, what would I say? "Hey Joshua, did you come over covertly and touch me when I was sleeping last night?" Yes, it would work out nicely by the time I was exhausted from the sun and my thoughts when I returned to the hotel. Felt as though they had been boiling all day, so I stripped without waiting to take a shower. I stripped off my shirt and fell onto the bed, still wearing my filthy cargo shorts and socks, wanting to sleep. Joshua arrived in a few minutes, but basically I just needed a mental vacation. Later, as he spilled some crackers on the desk, I heard the rustle of plastic. I hid my face in the pillow and asked, "Are you okay?" I gave him a thumbs up when he asked. Without raising my weary head, he laughed quietly, which was a startling sound. He didn't immediately answer when I said gently, "You really don't talk much, do you not, unless I have something worth saying?" Then I heard him sit on the edge of his bed for a bit. "Do you often wonder if, in any case?" That made me pause, and I rolled over because people want to hear what you have to say. Enough to give him a quick glimpse. But he was absorbed in his gaze, staring at the ceiling with his arms behind his head. He added, "Have you ever considered that you might be more fascinating than you allow yourself to be?" My chest constricted. He gently turned his head and caught my eyes, perhaps because I was quiet, or for some other reason. Perhaps something in the air moved both of them across the little space, but he wasn't. His eyes were serious, but not passionate, and he was not smiling as usual. He seemed open and inquisitive, as if he wanted me to share something I had been putting off for too long. Later that evening, as we silently prepared for bed, he brushed I acted as though I was reading a book that I wasn't actually paying attention to. The sound of our breathing filled the room as the lights went out, and his bed creaked a little. Did I not remain motionless and listen as he moved mine? I'm not sure how long I laid there waiting, half sleepy, half conscious, but I knew exactly when he woke up. The sound of his bare feet on the chilly tile floor, the rustle of blankets. I kept my eyes closed while there was a pause in the air, followed by the faint. My heart pounded in my chest as he knelt next to my bed and whispered something about fabric. He didn't say anything or touch me, but I could feel him there. I waited transfixed to hear the slight catch in his breath and smell the smell of sun-warmed flesh and cheap, aggressive soap. Then I felt his fingertips brushing slowly and deliberately, right below the hem of my shorts, against my leg. I should have moved, but I didn't, and since I waited, I believe that was the start of everything. For him, I felt as though I hadn't slept at all when I woke up the following morning. Joshua's fingers had ghosted over my thigh during the night, leaving my legs entangled in the sheets and my flesh still warm. Prior to then, my heart was pounding too loudly in my chest for me to go back to sleep. Not because I was afraid, but something I didn't open my eyes when he touched me, stranger. For some reason I couldn't yet name. I didn't say anything or stop him, so why the whum? When I eventually sat up, Joshua was already clothed and seated on the edge of my chair. The question kept repeating in my mind like a broken song. He looked at his bed while holding a bag of trail mix and wearing earbuds. Up nodded to me without saying anything or showing any signs of the previous night. "You sleep," he said. "Okay?" I hesitated as he inquired nonchalantly while putting a few almonds in his mouth. "Yes, you're out cold," he responded with a smile. "Didn't even hear you snore, so I made a fake laugh, but it made my stomach turn. Faking once again. Or perhaps I was the one who pretended that I hadn't been motionless when he violated a boundary. But we still hadn't discussed. We went downstairs for breakfast with the rest of the group, and the customary hum of chatter filled the air as one person was talking about the night market, and another was debating which pyramid was the most amazing. As Joshua joked with the man seated across from us, I poked my head down at a half-toasted piece of bread. But even when he was laughing, and I saw that he was giving me brief looks, as if to make sure I was still there and all right. The bus that day took us to Carrick Temple. Was he hoping I wouldn't bring it up, or was he waiting for me to? Giant columns rose like stone trees, and the grandeur was so overwhelming that it made you feel insignificant and little. I tried to concentrate on the guide's remarks, but my mind was distracted by the dust of civilizations and old prayers. Returning to the sensation of contact, the quiet, and the way Joshua's fingers had lingered uncertainly but intriguedly, and I sensed him walking next to me when we stopped for water. "You good?" I asked. He questioned. "Yeah," I replied hastily, avoiding eye contact. "You've been—" He didn't respond straight away, so I shrugged, as I'm usually quiet. I looked up in surprise as he remarked, "You don't have to be, you know. Not with me." This time the eyes were gentle and sincerely not mocking. "I didn't realize that you didn't always have to play invisible." But he continued, "I mean it." How did our group react to it? Later that afternoon we had a quick boat ride down the Nile, where the water shimmered. Palm trees bordered the riverbanks in a verdant sky, and the wind blew across them. Joshua and I ended up sitting side by side because it was warm but felt nice against our skin. By side once more, however, I didn't really have an option because initially everyone had paired up. Remained silent while leaning back against the boat's side with one leg extended. I, on the other hand, sat rigidly with his eyes closed as if he were at rest. After a few moments he whispered, "You're quiet again," with his hands folded between my knees. I mumbled, "Just taking it all in," as his eyes remained closed for minutes before turning to. "You're not mad, are you?" I asked myself, my heart thumping. "Why would I be mad?" Said, "I don't know. I don't want to make you uncomfortable." I may have spoken too hastily when I said, "I'm not uncomfortable," but the words weighed heavily between us. He nodded slowly. "Just figuring things out." He leaned back once again, allowing it to fall. The boat suddenly jolted, impacting a gentle wave, and I tripped a little. Out of reflex, I extended my hand, only a second before landing on Joshua's thigh. It wasn't deliberate, but the touch I snatched my hand back because it felt like an electric shock running through my body. "Sorry," he said in an odd voice. "It's okay." I gazed at him calmly, and he was observing me without taunting or smirking. During the remainder of the journey, neither of us spoke, and that evening at the hostel, the atmosphere in our room felt he was quieter than Joshua, but he was more reserved. We both took a shower and altered, circling one another in an uneasy cadence. The unspoken burden between us had become too great to ignore. Pretended not to notice Joshua's constant glances at me while I was scrolling through my phone on my bed. At one point, he put his phone down and glanced at his own screen, reading, I wonder what will happen next." I looked up in confusion as he questioned, "What do you mean?" "After college," he asked, "who will we still communicate with, who will forget?" "I suppose I haven't given it much thought," I shrugged. He nodded. "I give it a lot of thought, such as what if this is all a passing phase?" And even though it was the most honest, he sounded distant and depressed, like the individuals we connect with here. What if we never see them again? "Why are you telling me this?" I asked Joshua, who paused before turning to face me. He had sounded like this before the trip started. The room fell silent because I suppose I'm beginning to care about what happens with you. Part of me wanted to ask him what he meant, but my breath stuck in my throat. Barely above a whisper, I added, "I know you don't even know me." He spoke enough that he could see that you were different from everyone else. The way you never allow anyone to approach you closely enough to wish that you would let me too. I was at a loss for words, so I remained silent. He nodded, then switched off the light and went to bed in the dark, lying there with my heart pounding while I stared at the ceiling. I kept thinking about what he said. Was he actually observing me, or was I simply seeing him at last? But I knew there was still a lot more air to come. Between us had shifted. It wasn't particularly tense, but it was quieter, like if something waiting to be spoken, and neither of us knew how to begin. Joshua stopped making jokes during the group. Tour's effortless charm persisted, but the light-hearted gleam in his eyes had faded. Even though he no longer casually reached out or touched my arm, he continued to observe me when he believed I wasn't looking. Even though he didn't speak much, he remained near to me as we were riding the bus, and I was feeling every glance and silence, and with every night that went by, the space between our beds felt smaller. I guess I'm beginning to care about what happens with you after thinking about what he said the previous evening. Said it as if it were a line, and perhaps that's what frightened me the most, since I wasn't sure what to do with facts like that. Following a lengthy meal with the group at a nearby eatery with a fiery atmosphere, Joshua and I all gobbled up the lentil soup and sticky sweet pastries far too fast, silently made their way back to the hostel, while the rest stayed around to chuckle at something one of the females had said. I returned to the room where Joshua and I were ensnared in our own little orbit. I grabbed a book and headed directly for my bed, because I needed something to hide behind, even if Joshua was scrolling through his phone on his bed while the gentle glow illuminated his eyes, not paying attention to the text on the page. Face in the dark, and we remained there for a while without talking or doing anything. "You're really into that book, huh?" he asked, after putting his phone down after he had been breathing the same dense air for a while. I didn't check, but the sound of a voice shattering the stillness was like a ripple over quiet water. "Decent." He looked at the ceiling with his arms leaned back behind his head. "You always—" I paused, wondering what books were meant to signify. "Do you have an escape plan? You use headphones as armor to deter others from becoming distracted." His remarks hurt because they were correct, not because they were harsh. "You don't know me," I murmured softly. "I'm trying to." And he looked up. "Now that you're gazing at me intently, I can see why Joshua moved forward on the bed. Jordan, even though you don't want to, I see you." So he rests his elbows on his knees. I sat there too, still not sure what to do with that. "And you act as though you don't give a ooh, damn." "Nothing bothers you," he said. "But I don't believe it for a moment. You simply don't want anyone to know that I swallowed hard and hardly spoke. Working." But he hesitated when I questioned why he cared, and he said it quietly. "I think I like you." The words struck a chord. Wave that was gentle yet powerful enough to take my breath away. I blinked what I've been attempting to say it for days, but I'm not sure how I wasn't sure whether you would hear me. I wasn't sure what to say, and I wasn't even sure how to think about when the moments began. His palm slapping back on my arm, the murmur in the darkness, and the way he gazed at me as though I were something unexpected I'd been telling myself for so long that he was just playing around, but I couldn't help but want him. I acknowledged that I was having hallucinations, but I wasn't sure what to say at the time. "You don't need to say anything," he said, using my voice. "I only needed you." So I stood slowly and moved to the center of the room, to be aware that he simply went to bed after turning out the lights, leaving me in his confession, hung in the darkness like the heat of the Egyptian sun. I lay there for hours, wide-eyed and lost in my thoughts, instead of sleeping. Joshua Owens, who I'd hate to share a room with just a few days before, liked me. I was liked by the same man who seemed impenetrable and bigger than life, and not in a casual way, or as if it were a joke. Even worse, I didn't despise the thought or the recollection of his. I didn't dislike the way he touched me, as if I were something that needed to be handled carefully, even if his hand was on my thigh. I was afraid because my skin had been tangled ever since, and every time he glanced at me, my chest felt tighter. Indeed, but I wasn't disgusted or perplexed as I had assumed. Perhaps it was curiosity or something else entirely. The following morning, there was a calm atmosphere, suggesting that need might even be the start of want. As we prepared, we didn't talk much again, and he didn't say anything. Didn't inquire. Joshua remained near me without touching me while the company piled up to see the Kararnak temple. But while the guide was describing, I sensed every motion and look he made. "The history of the temple," he leaned down and whispered. "You okay?" I nodded. "Unable to," he said. "I'm fine," with a sigh, as if he wanted to say more but didn't want to. I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer after supper, so we returned to the hotel. And I sat on the edge of my bed as he stretched and dropped his bag. My heart was racing, so I murmured, "Let's talk," paused in the middle of his stretch and slowly dropped his arms, saying, "Okay, I'm not sure how to." He stroked the back of his neck and asked, "Start?" "Why now, Joshua? Why say all this here?" I couldn't keep acting like I was weary because I believed it would go away if I kept quiet. But being here with you, it simply clarified everything how I requested. And he stared directly into my response was, "That I don't just like you, Jordan. I think I'm falling for you." You know, when he mentioned that he was falling for me, I wasn't sure how to react. I sat on the border between us, thick and heavy, ready to be unloaded. Of the bed motionless as Moloch stood across the room, his eyes full of peaceful honesty. He wasn't. He didn't rush me. Instead, he waited for a response and said, "I don't know." I finally mumbled, "What to say?" And Joshua nodded as if he had anticipated it. "You," he continued gently, "don't have to say anything right now. I just needed you to know that's all." He didn't appear upset if I wanted to say something because he appeared relieved, as if expressing the truth had lifted some of his burdens. Wanted to bridge the gap between us by reaching over, but the words stuck in my throat since my mind was still racing. Without saying another word, he turned off the lights to see how the world had swung overnight and climbed into his bed. The room turned dark, yet there was still a buzzing sound full of all the things we hadn't spoken. I laid on my back and gazed into the... I wasn't bewildered like I used to be, but I was on edge all the time. Didn't feel scared or embarrassed. Instead, I felt as though my body had turned into a vibrating tuning fork that I knew was silent but strong. Of Joshua's respiration, the room's temperature, his body's shape, and he was awake in the bed across from mine, and I knew it too, though I'm not sure how. I remained motionless for a long time, but I heard him change ultimately